If you are beginning CenterPoint Payroll at any point other than January 1 as your first pay run, you'll want to enter a startup pay that represents all of your employees' payroll activity from January 1 to the first pay run that you're going to be entering into CenterPoint Payroll. It's important to enter the startup pay before your first real pay run so CenterPoint knows if any maximum calculations have been met on taxes or deductions. The startup pay is done from the Setup menu under Payroll Details and all the way at the bottom, Startup Pay. You'll want to click your New button, and the screen looks very similar to the screen that you'll see in Pay Employees, except that when you do a startup pay, the startup pay does not post to General Ledger account activity. You simply save it, and it's not going to show up on any General Ledger reports or in transaction search. Startup pay is strictly for CenterPoint payroll reports and will be included in your employees' W-2 information and all of your state and federal tax filings. You'll want to pick your company and the bank account. It came in with a bank account because there's only one for this company. If you have multiple companies and you want this to default to that company all the time, right-click after you make the selection and set as default. And the next time I won't have to fill in that field. You can give this pay run a number if you want, and the deduction benefit frequency is going to manage which deductions and benefits are calculated on this particular pay run. So in this case, you're going to want to use the first pay period. We're going to need to overwrite all of those calculations anyway for the startup pay. In the pay period, you're going to want to put 010118. You could do this for every pay run that you actually did in your previous payroll, or you could do it by the quarter. I suggest doing a quarter rather than an entire year to date, so that your quarterly reports and quarterly totals will be correct also on any payroll report activity. So we're going to do this to 033118 and the pay date 033118. You won't need the extra frequency. There's a memo line that would be used when printing checks, but again, we're not going to be printing anything from this pay run. It's just a startup pay. There are different ways you can filter your employee list. For example, if you wanted to do, if you have a lot of employees and you wanted to just do one department at a time, there's a way to filter with different ways, or just all your direct deposit employees. We're just going to leave it at no filter because there's only a few employees here for my sample. And the arrows here allow you to move to the right of the employees that you want to work with at this point. So I could take one at a time, or if I click my double right arrow, it will move all of the employees over at one time. I'm now ready to go over to the Enter Pay tab. And in my Enter Pay are all the employees that I selected. They are ordered by the column that has a little arrow. I can add additional columns here if I wanted to, if I right-click and go to Add Remove Columns. If I want to include employee abbreviation, perhaps, and now put that in the first position, that would list my employee's abbreviation, and I could sort it by that, or I could switch around and sort it however I want. The last column is going to be the net pay. You'll notice that George Aspen has an amount because he is a salary person, and it brought in his salary rate. So generally with salary people, you don't need to do anything. It's going to be calculating it for you. However, in this case, in our startup pay, we need to overwrite this rate for the amount that it would have been for the whole quarter, which would be this 1442.31 times 13, which comes out to 18,750. Once the earnings are in there, it will do what it thinks to be the calculations for all of the deductions, employee taxes, benefits, and taxes. In the startup pay, we're going to need to verify all of those and correct any ones that aren't correct. So in the case of this 401% of wage, it's probably correct because it's taken a percentage. That's probably the right amount based on his salary. But on the other ones that I see here are probably a fixed rate, and we're going to need to overwrite those. So this was probably a 13, the weekly amount. This is a weekly payroll employee frequency. And so we would put in the correct amount here. Once you put in the correct amount, it's going to check the box that it was override and changed. And you would go right down the line and make any changes to match what was in the first quarter, in this case, of their each one of their different taxes and deductions. The employee taxes, Medicare and Social Security should be very close, but federal withholding and any state withholding are going to be off because it's going according to the brackets, and this total amount of the gross wage for the quarter would not be matching with what really happened. So you'll need to adjust whatever it was in their actual pay that they previously were paid for. And the same is the case on the employer benefits. Some of them might be right, but a lot of the ones that are fixed rate, you're going to need to adjust. And then also on the employer taxes. Most of these will be right, but if it's some other kind of calculation, you'll want to match those. Once you have that done, then you can go on to your next employee. You don't need to save it when you're done with the first employee. You just click on your next employee that you want to work with and continue with putting in what they did in the same pay period. And if it's a piece rate, then, and you're tracking hours, you put in hours, and then you might also need to do the pieces here, which is doing the calculation. So you just go right down the line and identify what this employee did. When you are finished with each one of the employees, you won't need special adjustments, won't be applicable for the startup pay. You can go to the totals and make sure that your net pay here is accumulating to what you really did do as net pay on that time frame, and the taxes, benefits, all of these you can double check. And again, you won't be printing checks, you'll simply be saving. And it will say that you saved it. And if we go back out to the list, we have our total. It's called, the status is totals only. A totals only pay run can always be edited again. You can go back into this pay run and make any changes if you made a mistake and resave it. It can be deleted, and what you'll be doing is a startup pay for each quarter up through where you're actually going to be starting your first pay run. And if you are doing a pay run in a quarter where it's partway into that quarter already, then you can still do a total startup pay for the beginning of that quarter up until where you're going to be beginning your first pay run. So you could end up with 4 totals only payroll if you're doing it by the quarter. Or as I mentioned before, you could do a totals payroll for every pay period that you did in your previous payroll software. And when you're complete with this, you're ready to do your first pay run, either with timesheets or entering them through Pay Employees and Enter Pay.